Hello everyone, my name is Justin Bischof. I'm the chair of the Manhattan School of Music Alumni Council, and this is my project entitled MSM Over 80 Conversations, where I interview distinguished musicians who've been a part of Manhattan School for many years, and they will share their experiences and their life stories with all of us. So enjoy. Solomon, it's great to have you here. Thank you for being one of the first interviewees for this project.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. I just want to call your attention to the fact that I imagine you did a lot of research to find out that I was over 80, because the only thing that shows me in the MSM website is my photo. And you could never tell that I was over 60. But
this is true. There was this one thing called your 85th birthday celebration.
Oh, I see.
So that all
what a mistake.
That came out.
What a mistake.
So then that's how we knew. So I know that people would love to hear about your growing up. You grew up in Cuba with Polish parents, yes? And can you share what your experience was growing up 85 years ago in Cuba? And how you got into music and how your journey began?
Yes, well, it's to me something I have been thinking about because it has affected my teaching. What I see now as an opportunity to be influenced by so many different cultures, which I see they represent what I teach. Let's start with the fact that, yes, I was born in Havana. My parents immigrated to Havana from Poland in 1928. They met in Cuba. So I guess I show musical talent because I sang as a child. And I accompanied myself with a guitar. And I even have a photo of myself with a guitar, little kid. And actually, my father, who eventually, before I was born, he already had a jewelry store in front of the Havana Capitol. So there were two orchestras that played for tourists every night, and the directors, at least of one of the orchestras, always asked my father to let me sing with the orchestra as a child. So a friend of my mother, who also immigrated before her, she was a sophisticated lady. Her daughter eventually became a violinist in the Pittsburgh Symphony, and her other daughter was a famous actress in Cuba. So she had this sophistication from my parents, who didn't have this kind of education, to trust her. And she recommended that they get a piano for me and that I start piano lessons. I remember having an interview in my home with someone who my parents decided I wasn't going to study with, but he turned out to be eventually one of the leading Cuban composers of French descent. He became the Cuban ambassador to France and such an important man. But I didn't study with him. I studied with the teacher that she recommended after doing research, who happens to be one of the very important teachers in Cuba. And the good thing about him is that he studied in Paris, and he studied with Joaquin Nin, a Catalan pianist who was a prominent pianist in Europe, based in Paris, but also a pupil of Mikowsky. So when I was a child, I became aware, and I practiced exercises that Mikowsky taught to Joaquin Nin, and Joaquin Nin taught to Centenat, and Centenat wrote them for me. They were not even published. And the school was in many ways similar to the one that I faced when I entered Juilliard later and became a pupil of Goronitsky. But the good thing about Cuba is that there I used to live near the largest theater in Havana, which brought the greatest companies from all over the world to perform, particularly Spanish companies. So I saw a lot of flamenco dancing, a lot of Spanish music. I also saw a lot of Cuban popular music performed by jazz pianists. I saw the influence of the Cuban black community, who were originally slaves. And that made me aware of these incredible rhythms. Eventually, when I received my doctorate at Columbia University, I did my dissertation on the leading Cuban, on the 19th century Cuban contradanza, these short pieces, and the leading composer was Ignacio Cervantes. And I'm very happy that I have taught Cuban music and of course Spanish music and African influenced music to my students over the years. They have performed it all over the world, and I think that's an important contribution, especially as we face current times and the need to enhance the music of minority composers. So also, because I'm not religious, but I was of Jewish descent, so I had my own group of performers. The band was called Pola Conga, and the Polaco comes from the way the Cubans call any Jew who came from Europe, whether they came from Poland or any other place. They were just called Polacos. So my group, I named Pola Conga, and some of my friends, we played at bar mitzvahs and weddings and parties. Whenever there was a piano, everybody wanted me to play and sing with them. And that made me able to play and perform conservative Latin music. It was not Cuban jazz. I never was able to do that or was interested, but melodic things. And then through my parents, I was able to appreciate the music they liked, which was Eastern European. So when I deal with recordings of the masters that I never heard in person, like Friedman and Hoffman and Rosenthal, I am aware of their style. I feel it in my blood. I can teach it, and it's a sense of rubato, of color, of nuance that became very important, and I have had a few number of students who were able to capture it, even though they were not European. They were one Korean and 2 or 3 Chinese. And I'm proud that they can play with that kind of sense of improvisation, little vignettes that are so special. Unfortunately, in music schools currently, there is an emphasis in only teaching big pieces. Mm-hmm. And the art of playing a short piece, an anchor piece. Very often my students arrive with a repertoire list, and I look at it and I say, what happens if you are invited to a party? Somebody says, play something. What are you going to play? A Schubert sonata, a Chopin etude? Is there something you can play that's like a little piece of dessert? And most of them don't have it, unfortunately. So I am very eager to, in my teaching, bring together all those values, including, of course, the Russian school, which I was able to get from Goronitsky, who was a pupil of Joseph Levin at Juilliard, and that sums up, I think, the main aspects of my background in Cuba.
I always think about this. I'm an improviser on the keyboard and on organ and piano in addition to conducting, and it changes. Once I developed that skill, it really changed my way of interpreting music to have that kind of a freedom. And I find a lot today, there's so much obsession with just how fast and how many notes and how accurate. To be able to instill that kind of a style is, to me, is always what makes exciting and engaging music making. So it's wonderful to hear that from you. Was there an option for you to have to go to Russia instead of going to New York in terms of what was happening politically in Cuba when you were younger for studying, or was that not a factor?
Okay, well, before the Cuban Revolution, just before, about a year before, there was a national competition. And I participated and I won the first prize. And then I was offered a scholarship to study abroad. And at that time, before the revolution, this Russian influence was not so important. The most important city I would think of going would be New York. And that's where I went to study. But when I was in New York at Juilliard, studying with Goronitsky, who was a pupil of Levin, that was a Russian school, absolutely. The Cuban government wanted me to go to continue my studies in Moscow in order to keep the scholarship. They actually didn't have the means anymore to send me dollars because of the American embargo. So I personally didn't want to do it for various reasons. One is that my parents were planning to go to Florida since my father was a businessman. They had nothing against the revolution. They understood the reasons for many of the goals of the revolution, but as a businessman, he could not survive. And my mother was very upset about leaving, and she actually was very upset. I won't even tell you what happened. But I decided to comply with their request to go to Havana, and I had a meeting with the cultural attaché of the Russian embassy. I was very impressed of his knowledge of Cuban poets, writers, music, very cultural man. And what I was trying to do at that time with meeting him was to try to get my piano out of Cuba. And that turned out to be a failure because Cuba did not allow musical instruments to go out. So I just stayed at Euler and got my master's degree.
And that competition was, you said, 1 year before or a couple of years before?
Maybe 2 years before, yes. I even studied 1 year at Havana University waiting for that scholarship because it was a long process and I didn't want to waste time. So I was able to study for 1 year, and I remember taking a class in physics with a Cuban physicist that was so great that Einstein declared him to be one of the 10 physicists in the world that understood his theory of relativity.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a great experience, but eventually I'm glad that I went into music.
Right, didn't become a physicist. When I was reading up about you, I mean, I've known you for many years, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the incredible list of achievements this man has done. I was surprised and interested that you went and decided to do a doctorate in musicology on the Cervantes. Was your
That was dissertation.
right?
Well, you know, when I was in my master's degree, I unfortunately began to feel like needles in my right hand. And so I went to I already had heart problems at that time, so I went to my cardiologist. And when I told him I had a problem here, he didn't deal with this. He just put his thumb here inside these two bones here. It was so painful. And there he found out that my problem was a pinched nerve from my neck going all the way to my right hand. So I am a perfectionist. I think that I play enough for my students to get the ideas that I want them to follow, the sound, the phrasing, but I am too much a perfectionist to try to practice when I cannot control 100% of what I'm doing. So slowly I realized that I had to stop my goals of being a performer. And I went to Columbia University because I wanted to learn more. And I felt I should devote my time to knowing what I was unable to learn until then. And I'm very grateful that I did. I think it almost changed my personality. It was a great experience. Well, first of all, I was very shy when I was young. And my parents were worried about me, being used, being persecuted. How do you survive if you cannot open your mouth and say what you want or what you think? I remember going to a New Year party with a young girl that I liked, and she complained when she got home to her parents that it was the most boring night she ever had because I just was dancing and didn't say even a word. So at Columbia, I remember having to take a course in public speaking. And very soon, my great colleague and great pianist Raymond Lowenthal here at Manhattan passed away. And I was asked, they knew that we were very close friends, and I admire him a lot. We had great conversations. And I had to say the eulogy at the synagogue on West End Avenue. I'd never done that before. And what I decided to do was not to plan my speech, but to just read what he wrote in introductions to his books and collections. And that inspired me so much that I stood there and I just talked without any problem. And eventually, when the two openings of my hall, the opening of my hall here, and then the reopening when I enlarged it, I had to speak to the audience. And I found out that I was talking and people were laughing. That made me so happy, because I'm basically a depressed person. And people like me like to make people laugh. So, of course, some of my colleagues are annoyed with the fact that I never take anything seriously. And I would say that the person I admire the most, that I would like to have been, is Victor Borge. He's my idol.
Oh,
it's not Horowitz, it's not Rubinstein, it's not Karajan. It's
Really?
Victor Borge, the man who plays so beautifully and in the old style. And sits down in front of the piano, lifts the rack, which is shining, and looks at himself to make sure that his hair is looks okay.
Well, the music's upside down.
He's a master. So I'm a frustrated person because that I did not achieve.
How interesting. So you didn't, when you started out with the piano, then you didn't have a vision of wanting to be this world teacher?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I realized I had talent for teaching, which I think about it much later as I look back. When did I learn to teach? I actually was in high school, and it was not piano. I had my best friend who lived across the street, and we were both very lazy. We went to class. I could not follow the lectures. I had no concentration, and it was all based on learning a textbook. I could even today recite to you the classification of the mammals, which gave me 100 points in my last science exam. It meant nothing. I never went to see those mammals in any museum. It was just memory, memory, memory. But what I did in order to study at the last moment was to sit with him all night. Our parents were so upset. We didn't study all year long, chasing girls, going to parties. And then at the last moment, we had to stay all night long before an exam without sleep. And what I did is that I read out loud a paragraph. And then I asked him what he didn't understand. Then I explained it to him. So by reading it out loud, I remembered the text much better than if I had read it without saying it. And by finding out what he didn't understand, I learned how to teach and explain what he needed. I think that's the basis of teaching. The basis of teaching is, a student can play for 10 teachers and everyone will tell him something different. You should do this, you should that. But I think the most important thing is which teacher goes right to the key element that is needed, and all the others come in a certain order. If you invert that order, you fail. There's something you have to know first before you go to the second step and the third step. And I felt that I started to teach then. And somehow, my next experience was when I was a student at Juilliard and the scholarship was stopped. I had to teach anybody. And I went from house to house. Actually, my friend, American pianist Daniel Pollack, who was a winner in the Tchaikovsky competition, won Van Claveren, won first prize, he won seventh prize. He had a big class with his wife in Westchester, and he got a job teaching at State University of California at Los Angeles. So he gave me all those students. So I bought a Volkswagen, and I used to teach from house to house. And I would say there is a difference between a concert pianist who suddenly has to teach and usually relies on playing for the student so beautifully, what a great experience, but cannot explain so well maybe how to solve problems because they never had him to start with. And it's hard to imagine telling somebody how to play a trill if you can just sit down and play a trill. Just play it like this. Oh yeah, that's wonderful, but what do you do to cope, what finger to use, what movements? So I think that experience in teaching beginners, intermediate, all persons, lovers of music, make me realize what it takes to teach. And basically, what I want my students is to be teachers themselves. They spend hours and hours practicing where I am not there. So it's wasted because all they do is play. And if they make a mistake, maybe they do it again. But being aware that every student who practices has 10 pupils, and to know how much information these 10 fingers can absorb before they are secure and when they are ready for more. And if you confuse them by giving them too much information in your practice, then you fail. So learning to practice is learning to teach yourself. I'm so boring with all this academic information. I'm sorry.
This is not boring at all. This is what people, I mean, I'm fascinated, and I know the people watching are. So it's not that you say that you have necessarily a process, other than the process is each student, you have to be able to identify what the core issue is, and then you are able to sort of build building blocks on top of that. Instead of just like, I've seen teachers where it's just, this is how you do it, and it doesn't always work for each individual student. But correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying that you have to find that 1 out of the 10 teachers that knows how to get right into what the problem is or the area to focus on.
You know, I'm not claiming that I am. I mean, there are so many teachers who can say something else and achieve their goals. Everyone has different points of view.
I'm going to take this moment for the folks who are watching to just, and I'll do this very quickly because it's such a long list, I won't do everything. Solomon is, this is in no particular order, he's been the member of juries around and competitions all over the world. He has international piano festivals, Spain, France, in Cuba. He's taught master classes everywhere, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Shanghai, Jakarta, Manila, Osaka, Madrid. I'm just skipping around some of them. His students, he has so many, we'd be here all day trying to name them, but include people like Simon Dinnerstein, Kirill Gerstein, and Alexander, I always get his name wrong, that's it. They've won prizes at the Rubinstein competition, Tchaikovsky, Richter, Bonn, the Schumann, the Queen Elizabeth, the Montreal. This is one of my favorites. The Manhattan School of Music has a concerto competition every year. He's had more than 40 winners of that. And along this line of great pianists and being good teachers, his students teach at Manhattan School of Music, Juilliard, Mannes, Brooklyn College, Copeland School, Northwestern. The list goes on. His students have played with the Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Berlin. They played with Barenboim, Dudamel. The point of that incredible list is that your students are just, you're a global presence. It must give you so much pride and joy to have had that kind of an impact on the music world.
I cannot accept that they are successful because of my teaching. I mean, I had a part of it, but to start with, they're very talented. And that is what's important. I just was very lucky. I can tell you the story how each student came to me, and it's a question of luck. They say that students need teachers. Teachers also need students. And yes, I would say that whatever I did with them at that time, when I was a teacher, maybe was what they needed. I mean, Kirill has gone on to a big career. He's a very intellectual pianist, a thinker, a brilliant man. I don't think I would be the right teacher for him now, but that doesn't bother me. Right. I introduced him to what he needed at that time, and maybe if it would have been different, he would not have gone to where he were. It's a series of factors. So I would say about everyone that you mentioned, that they went on to study also with other teachers. So my role was to do the right thing at that time. But very often I feel sorry that when they studied with me, I didn't know as much as I know now. So very often I tell them, you should go back to Manhattan and ask for your money back, unless you had a full scholarship. Because I wish I could teach them again.
Well, and you're very humble.
And maybe it would be better, but maybe they would not have achieved what they did, because, you know, it's very complicated. What are the factors that make somebody have a career?
Well, it's like when you meet people in life at different periods. When you have different friends or relationships, they might not have worked out at all if you had met, at a different point in your life. I mean, you're very humble about this, but it's clear, given all the scope of what your students do, is that they met you at the right time, and you were giving them an incredible gift through your teaching.
But I talk about it a lot with students who always, very often, read my bio and want to study with me. And I ask a very important question: why do you want to study with me? And I like the ones like Kirill or Simona, who was a little child. Most of the ones who succeed, they want to play more beautifully. They want to be better musicians. But there are others who come to me, your pupils want so many competitions. And as soon as I hear that, I know they never will, because they love themselves, they don't know music. And very often, I try to convince them that going to a teacher because he's famous doesn't mean that is the best teacher for you. I very often use the example of Leon Fleischer. Maybe I have a student who needs so much work, who needs technique, who needs style, who needs so many things. And I say to her, would you feel you are lucky if you studied with Leon Fleischer if he were alive? Oh, that would be great. I said, that would be great if you're already a very advanced pianist, but do you think he's going to do the work you need right now? So the question is to find a teacher who will do what you need at a specific moment in your life, and not think always, oh, the most famous is the one who's going to get me there.
They love themselves more than they love the music. That's going to be the takeaway line. That is just so, that's just spot on. And we see that, I mean, I see that in all the different people I work with. By listing all what your students have done, it's they're with the music, they're engaged in the music, and people are recognizing it. So then you get these accolades. But I can see what you mean exactly. How do you, how is it, so you came in 1969. When Manhattan School came to this building, part of the deal was they were going to take some of the Juilliard pre-college, and then that's how you guys...
I was teaching at the pre-college at Juilliard for 7 years before.
And then you started here. So how would you, is there a way that you would describe students from the 70s and 80s versus the kinds of students that come to you today in terms of just the nature of the piano business or the piano world right now? Would you say that there's been a change or a difference, or is it just individual every time?
Well, I would say the first thing I would mention is the fact that at that time there were very few competitions. And now every student that knocks on my door brings with a list of all the competitions they won. Not always, but very often. And I think that's detrimental. Even detrimental to their development, because it encouraged them to select repertoire that is selected on the basis of effectiveness. They come from atmospheres where playing something loud and fast brings them more applause.
Right.
They don't know what it means to play. For example, you select a piece to end a recital, and they say, no, it ends softly. And then I said, if you were to hear Clara Haskell or Radu Lupo or Mura Peraya play a Schubert sonata that ends softly, or anything that's softly but is so great, I can tell you I have been a witness to a much longer applause, standing ovation, in those moments that the one you get from the volume. And this idea that sweating and getting red and fighting with the instrument is something that is damaging. And I try to change my students' attitude. And I would say that I can be very effective. I would say that students come with those wrong values, and in 1 year they become a different person. They look at music in a different way. And I think that's the base of success. One element is to be willing to learn new and interesting repertoire. They always want to play what Kissing plays. Okay, so if you play like Kissing, go ahead and play the G-minor ballad. But every time you play a piece that we have heard Horowitz and Kissing and all these great pianists play, we compare your performance with what we have in our ears. you always fail. You always fail. It's much better to include in your repertoire things that are new, of quality, and where this constantly comparing with other great pianists is not the main reason for evaluation. And also exploring new music, because sometimes they study for years and years. And I think one of the merits of Manhattan School of Music is that we prepare our students to face the profession. We are able to support the greatest talents who might go, like Kirill and Alex and Inessa Sienkiewicz, into careers. But the most important is that we also support those who can make a contribution and need to be on top of what is required today in terms of repertoire. Very often I interview a student who comes from a famous school. I studied there for 7 years. And suddenly I see that as far as contemporary music, there's only one piece. And I asked him, what encouraged you to learn this piece? He said, well, it was the requirement for the audition.
For a competition, yeah.
Or for a competition, or for even the audition here. So I say, imagine that I am the dean of a school, and I'm interviewing you for a job. You want to enter a doctorate, right? You want to eventually get a position in a university or college. So when I meet you, and I know that you play very well, it would be incumbent from me to show you the score of a composer in my faculty. I have a great composer in my faculty, very talented, and this is a piano trio he wrote. Look at it. Have you ever played anything like this? No, I never. So I say, why should I hire you as a teacher if you will play a recital and cannot even play the music that my composer in my faculty is performing? So they have to face reality. So instead of being in a school where every student is taught as if he's going to win the first prize in the Tchaikovsky or the Liszt, it's a big mistake.
Yep.
3 or 4 of those who really have the talent profit from that attitude. But the rest feel an inferiority complex. And I have witnessed it. I have many classmates who went into other fields and could have done very well in music, but they felt that they were not the best, and therefore they didn't have a place in the music career. One of my worst pupils is a very successful teacher in New Jersey. She has like 30 students as a family, and the students play once a month in the church. She's very happy, and she's doing a good job. That's just an example.
Wow. Yeah. So, and I would think too, over the course of the years, that process of some students of getting them to not think about the fastest and the loudest, and to become, inner and good musicians. You probably have examples of ones where it was really difficult and there was resistance.
Oh,
and others who were just dying for it, couldn't wait to have their soul opened up to this kind of music. But I'm sure you had some.
Look, I was like that. Or at least I was, and as I look back at my teacher at Juilliard, I feel that his selection of pieces were most geared towards my admiring how he played, because he needed the support and the admiration of his pupils. We in the music field are all very insecure. We want to be the best. I have a great cardiologist, he's great, people come from all over the world, but does he ever talk as being the greatest cardiologist? But in music, you have to be the best or else you're miserable. I have seen it. A student of mine played a great performance of a Liszt etude, and I felt it couldn't be played better, but one day I played for him a recording of someone who played it better, who was one of the great of the past, and I think he became miserable. So why do you have to be the best performance of that piece in the world? What is it that in music, in art, we suffer and we are not the best? I remember studying the Mephisto waltz. And every time I practiced it and I finished the piece, I had to go to the bathroom and get a towel and dry myself, because I made a climax out of every measure. so many climaxes. And then I attended Rubinstein's last concert. He was blind. They walked him to the piano. Can you imagine, in his 80s? And I was there, and he played Mephisto Waltz to end the program. And I think he could have played it 10 times in a row without any problem. It was all about saving energy. George Bolet gave a masterclass at Manhattan, and he talked about it. The climaxes are one or two. Just don't give away everything you have. So then I had the opportunity when Kirill played the Hades Concerto with the Boston Symphony in Carnegie Hall. The composer Hades conducted the Mephisto Waltz for orchestra, which I never heard before. And you know, the piece is all, the instrumentation is all woodwinds, flutes, oboe, very light. And how great is it to play it lightly, come up in their big moments, and be elegant and not give the sense of fighting. So this sense that the audience loves for you to be like a bullfighter trying to kill a bull when you play the piano is what I try to change that attitude in my students.
Do you ever talk about thinking of colors on the piano sometimes that are like the orchestra? I've found people mentioning that on occasion.
It's a constant reference. Just take, for example, the first sonata by Beethoven. So for me, it is a woodwind instrument playing that. So that affects the technique that you use. Because sometimes students play pa 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 pa. See that relaxation? A teacher can say, relax, relax, you must relax. No, don't relax, play stiffly. Pa 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 pa. My wrist is stiff. There's no bending here. Why? Because I want to achieve that dry woodwind quality. Very often in Bach, there could be a melody that the students are used to use the pedal, change with the harmony, but that richness of sound bothers me. It's not necessary, and it's actually very welcome to play something that doesn't have that kind of vibrato, a melody that's lean, instead of always vibrato. And I use this gesture constantly
with the violin,
to show the difference between a note, let's say a vocal note, a long note that needs to last for a long time, to be able to understand that a singer is not going to sing that note the way you are playing it, where you're just sticking the finger down and holding for a half note, but doesn't have the vibrato. And the wrist and how you use your hands has a lot to do, and also singing it. I wish my students would sing more like I always did, and be able to look at a score before they even put their hands on it, and be able to imagine what their ideal interpretation would be. Because when you start practicing and you start facing technical difficulties, and you develop certain approaches to interpretation that are the result of those limitations which you have at the beginning. So rather than develop an interpretation based on those limitations, I prefer that the students have an oral image devoid of any problems. Just like a conductor does not play the violin, does not play the viola, doesn't play the percussion instruments. He just hears, moves, and let the instruments finally do what he has in his mind.
You have the musical vision, and then you figure out.
And you are a conductor yourself.
Yeah, you have to have the fully formed musical vision, and then you figure out.
You have an easy job, right? You don't have to play all those instruments.
Not at once, no. It's an occupational hazard, isn't it, as for keyboardists, because we're not moving air, we're not moving this way. It's just the solitary motion that you have to then breathe life into. I ask everyone this question about the future of classical music, and you've been on this incredibly wonderful journey for so many years. No one has a crystal ball, but how do you see the world of piano in sort of the next 25 years in terms of our culture and the kinds of students that are coming to learn? And you mentioned that there are all these competitions now, but it's a different world than it was 50 years ago, you know?
It's difficult to tell, but I use as an example what happened at the Miller Theater at Columbia University. I was a witness to the many years where that hall was presenting traditional music by wonderful artists, and it was always empty. And suddenly they hired a artistic director whose name I don't remember, but he didn't last very long. He was so successful that he was invited by the New York City Opera to be there.
George Steele.
George Steele, thank you so much.
A lot of modern music, right? Contemporary music.
Well, George Steele was presented either very old music, pre-Baroque, and very contemporary music by having one composer come and discuss the music. Tania Leon, who is my close friend, was one of the ones that I went to hear. And it was packed. Packed by who? Young people.
I remember.
It's still an elite, okay? So, and that's something that happens in New York. It's difficult for me to imagine in other places that are less exposed to musical culture. But I think that we teachers have the responsibility to continue to teach the great masters, because to teach a Shomba Mazurka is much more difficult than to teach a piece by Carter. If I show the score of a piece by Carter with all the rhythmic complications, the student, I don't want to do that. And you know what I do very often is to sit at the piano and tell them a story of a movie they might be watching, where this woman is coming home at night, at midnight, and she opens the key of the main door, and she has to go up the staircase. And we know there's a man with a knife ready to kill her in her bedroom. And she's walking up, goes to the kitchen, drinks some milk, goes to the bathroom, and slowly walks to her room. And that little film needs background music. So while I'm telling that story, I'm playing weird chords and getting more tension on the piano and dissonance, until finally a bang when the man suddenly, she opens the door and the man jumps out the window and gets scared. Good ending. But then I go back to the same story and tell them, I'm going to tell you this story, but I'm going to play for you the Mozart Sonata in C major. Which music do you prefer? The sonata by Mozart or what I played before? Oh, what you played before is much better. But if I ask you to play two choices, a piece that sounds like what I played or the Mozart Sonata, what would you prefer to play? The Mozart Sonata. So you see what you're missing. What about the food that you eat? Do you like spicy food, or do you like only sugar in your food? You know, I relate to food very much, and then they get the message. The fact is that when they finish learning that Carter piece, for which they need to close the lid and tap the rhythms, which are fantastic. And I say to them, listen, tap that rhythm after they know it, and they do it well. Now please take a second movement of a Schubert sonata and tap the rhythm. Which one is more interesting? This piece is more interesting. So why do you have to assume that music can only be beautiful when it's harmonic and simple rhythmically? Why cannot assume that rhythm in itself can be an incentive for great music, like a percussion piece, which has no melody, but is absolutely exciting, and I can see audiences standing up. So they have to learn the values of what they don't know. It's a question of culture. One of the problems, of course, that I used to get students in the early years that were more in tune with the Western culture, and now we have to do a bigger job. We have to teach students who come from other countries who had not had the opportunity, but they catch very quickly. They're doing very well.
So that's a bright future, especially with people thinking in the way you're thinking in terms of the kind of repertoire and how to get students engaged. I hate when people ask me about favorites, but I still find it's a helpful question in terms of, process. If you had to pick a favorite composer that you like to teach, or that you like your students, or that you just really resonate with. Would it be really difficult to name one, or would it?
No, it would be easy. Not because it's my favorite, but because it's the basis for great music, including contemporary music, but maybe it's too much to say that. It would be Bach, and it has to do with the polyphony. And that's something that I have to deal all the time. So students want to play Liszt. Mm-hmm. They play the Liszt sonata. They play the Appassionata. And when it comes to a program fugue, they play a pre-college program fugue that children aged 9 or 10 are learning all over the world. Why this difference? Why is it that the teachers do not pay attention to the importance of Bach? So Bach polyphony is fundamental. But when you hear Bach, I just heard a week of auditions. I would say almost all the students who play the required program fugue or partita, they play what I call right-hand Bach.
Right-hand Bach.
Right-hand Bach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They hear whatever is in the right hand is more important. It's not that they want to, it's just a natural feeling. Bach did not play Chopin, did not play Beethoven, did not play Prokofiev. For him, all the voices were equal, unless you have a cantabile, a second movement of the Italian concerto. There is different. But most of the music, the voices are equal. And how terrible is that you and I have a conversation, and I am talking and you are all talking at the same time, and the effect is that whatever we're saying no one can hear. You take any program fugue by Bach, it starts with a schematic material that has 2 measures. The next 2 measures, the same thing is in the left hand. No way the student is listening to the notes on the right hand. So very often I tell them, I want you to play only the 8th notes in this piece, and I want you to play only the 16th notes, which very often happens in programs of fugue by Bach, that you have either material that is a 16th notes or 8th notes. And they play different roles. And when you don't play the other voice, you only play the one who is a 16th or 8th note, you can tell exactly how the music is going from one place to the other. But most important is how do you apply that into romantic music? Liszt is such a great composer, but if you only play Liszt, you play only octaves, thumb and 5th finger. What about all the other notes in between, which in Schumann play a role? You can in Chopin Nocturne, you have a melody, Opus 55, number 2, that the melody has a certain character and the inner voice has a different character. So in Bach, that is not so prevalent. It's more the voices playing a role in themselves. But in Schumann, he takes it further. There's also a voice that is lyrical, another voice that is crispy, that's dramatic, another voice that shows a sense of humor. It's not only changing the character from one short piece to another, which you don't have in the long pieces, but also the character among the voices. So if the students spend 20 years playing the piano, some of them never play Schumann, never play Bartok. Can you imagine what our role is at the college level to have to supply these elements, these vacuums that they have in the repertoire? It's a very difficult job.
Apart from being a conductor, I'm a concert organist, and so Bach is part of our Bible. And I have to say that it's very frustrating sometimes to hear how many, not all, but many modern concert pianists, that's like they play it because they think they have to play it, and it sounds, I call it typewriter music, and they're not doing what you're talking about. They're not getting inside the line and realizing the complexity and just how also moving and powerful it is with that language. Is it true? It's true, isn't it, that Chopin did a Prelude and Fugue every day of Bach? I thought I read that.
He had the Preludes and Fugues on top of the piano, and I recently read the story from one of his pupils who told that at the end of her lesson, he sat down and played a bunch of Preludes by Bach at the lesson. He loved Bach and he loved Scarlatti. And that's why I don't like when pianists are so aggressive playing Chopin. You know, when he writes forte and it's a grand polonaise, it's not the same as Liszt. They actually, Schumann and Chopin, from what I understand, did not like that element in Liszt of breaking the strings and playing so loud. They were much more sensitive, and I love to hear. You know, my student Yuan Schenk, who is very famous in China as a Bach player, but has also recorded all the works of Chopin, both on the piano, on a modern piano, and a piano from the time of Chopin. And he has been giving master classes and even bringing for the audience to see the two hammers, which are different in size, in weight, and has a long explanation as to how that affects how long a long note lasts, what are the changes that have to be made in terms of tempo, dynamics, volume, in order to do justice to the music of Chopin as played in the instruments that he composed.
Would the decay have been shorter then? As the piano got bigger and extended to 88 notes? And
it's not only the fact that it got bigger, but also I don't know the technicalities, but the size of the hammers was different. Mm-hmm. And he presents a case for... And then at the end of the masterclass that I heard, he was asked by the audience, so who is your favorite Chopin player? You know, and everybody expected him to say Christian Zimmermann, Rubinstein. He said Courtois, Friedman, and Shura Tchaikovsky. And they're all dead. And sometimes we talk in the cafeteria with my colleagues about who are the best pianists. Mm-hmm. Trying to talk about who is performing today that makes it worth taking a shower, get dressed, and go to Carnegie Hall. This is the answer. They're all dead. I don't know. I live in the past. I just hear these recordings of these artists.
There's no one today that compares?
The main thing is predictability. There's so many people who play so well, but you know exactly what they're going to do in the next measure. And, you know, you play Beethoven, and you have to... There's no one who respects body score. I mean, I suffer anything because I see a composer who's not down for 6 months writing a piece with such detail, erasing, scratching off, and finally coming with what he wanted. And he was aware of posterity. He knew that my students and all the students here in the school and everyone would be playing his sonatas and his pieces. Other composers were not so much aware of posterity. They didn't write so many details, Mozart, Haydn, even Bach. But when it comes to interpretation, the ability to add an element of surprise that makes me feel like I want to listen to see what's going to happen in the next measure. It keeps me on the edge, that kind of a pianist. But those who play very well, but you know what they're going to do, it's very good, but not for me at my state of my life to go and hear them. I'm not interested. I very seldom go to concerts. Sounds very pedantic. Maybe I should not say this, but is it true?
No, it's... I mean, to me, Beethoven, there's so much in how he developed the style and changed forms that there is surprise built in. So if it becomes routine, it loses what he was trying to do.
Well, many students want to improve on Beethoven. You know, I talk about it all the time. Because a good example is as simple as the Pathetic Sonata. After the introduction, the student feel it should be ta 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 ta. Every composer would have done it. It's obvious that the music is going on. And what did Beethoven do? No crescendo. It's after that. He was unique in his dynamic decisions. If you change that, you kill Beethoven. Yeah. And students are are geared by their instincts, which are based on playing other composers where something that goes up gets louder and something that goes down gets softer. Not with Beethoven. And that's just one of the elements.
To take the other side of the equation, are there any composers that are famous piano composers, but that don't interest you as much to teach or to play? And there can be no one, but sometimes people have someone that they don't actually, that we would be surprised that you don't really like.
Well, I don't want to send the wrong message.
Yeah.
But let's say I give you two examples. I gave a master class in Shanghai, and the student, I said, "What are you going to play?" The Dante Sonata by Liszt. And then he played it, but I also asked him, "Are you working on anything else?" Just for me to know, oh no, I love this piece so much, I cannot work on anything else. How long have you been working on this piece? Well, I've been working on it for 2 months. So in 2 months, you haven't played anything else except the Dante Sonata? No, that's what I love, that's what I want to play. And then I asked him, well, can you tell me something about Dante? Do you have any idea about who he was? And no way.
Wow.
So, well, I'm sorry I mentioned Shanghai. This can happen in any place. It can
happen anywhere. Sure.
It can happen in any place. Where students are attracted by the brilliance of the octaves and do not realize the content, the poetic overtones, and the meaning of the music. Sometimes a poem is included next to some of the Liszt pieces that inspire him, and they don't take the trouble to. It's a question of culture. For me, culture is very important. Don't play a piece if you don't know anything about the background, the composer. So my problem, I'm teaching now the first Polonaise by Liszt. I love that piece. He was a genius. And what I like about that piece for this particular student who finally studied for many years at small hands, is not a Liszt player, is that the music starts simple, much more simpler, and then there's a tremendous catharsis of brilliance in the middle, and then it subsides. If you have to start with a piece that has this kind of challenge from the first moment, it is much more difficult for someone who has small hands. So I would say that when I have given master classes, I have seen students bring me, if they require 2 pieces, 2 contrasting pieces, they bring me 2 contrasting pieces by Liszt, never Bach. So I remember one year which teachers scream at me because I gave a master class in a certain place and there was a sign, Mikowsky master class, no Liszt. Of course, they send the wrong message. It's not that I don't want to teach Liszt, it's that I don't want to teach only Liszt. And so these are the kind of things that are very hard to change.
I see. Understand. So this question is another one of these standard ones, but it's fun. If you would not have been in music, what could you have seen yourself then on a different path, in a different life path?
I had to face that because my father owned a jewelry. And even though he wanted to make sure that every time he invited friends to the house, that I went to the piano and played for them, he was so proud of the admiration, and even being a Jew running away from anti-Semitism, suddenly the ministry of a country, a non-Jewish country, gives me a scholarship to study. This is something he couldn't even begin to understand could ever happen in life. He was taught that nothing good can come from people who are not Jewish, unfortunately, because of what he witnessed. But as the owner of a successful jewelry store, gradually successful jewelry store, he wanted me to work with him and take it over. like many children, grown-up boys take over the business from their parents. And I helped him sell jewelry during my summer vacations. You know, I went there and I helped out. And I referred to it when I was giving the Presidential Medal at Manhattan School of Music at Riverside Church. That was one of the funny moments that I experienced talking to the audience. Because I was given a medal, and I had to speak. I was ready to speak for about 11 minutes. And Sirota told me, you can only speak for 4. And I had my speech prepared, and I was totally confused. So I said, I'm confused to the audience. I don't know what to say. I was going to talk for 11 minutes. I had lots of jokes to tell you. I was going to make you laugh. And now all I can do is just tell you my experience with medals like this. Because when I was a youngster during high school and during my college years in the summer, I helped my father sell jewelry. And I sold medals. They were part of the business of a jeweler. And these medals were made of gold and platinum, and they had the images of kings and emperors and diamonds. So I was thinking, what would my father think if he were today here and be witness to the fact that I get a so-called presidential medal made of plastic? You know, here I'm giving a plastic medal. And
Plastic?
Of course, the medals are plastic. Okay, so for someone with my experience selling gold medals, it was almost insulting, of course. Immediately I explained to the audience that this was the most important medal that I ever dealt with because it represented recognition of whatever contribution I made. So it was all a joke, but believe me, people were laughing with my comments, and that gave me a lot of pleasure, more than anything.
Well, you've been such a part of Manhattan School of Music for so many years as an amazing, illustrious teacher and a musical leader. That medal is certainly well deserved, and I want to thank you so much for having taken this time to meet and have this chat. It means a lot to us at Manhattan School, and I know to everyone watching on YouTube. Just wanted to thank you for spending this time.
I want to make a comment that interviews are only as good as the questions. You understand? I have been very boring, but I commend you for giving me an interview that gave me the pleasure of opening my heart and sharing some of the things that are part of me. And that's not always easy. So I commend you for that. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.